headquartered in Alameda County too. The panels that you're seeing there on those solar trackers are were actually manufactured in Fremont. So just to sum it up, of our systems, we have 12 photovoltaic systems, 1 fuel cell cogeneration, and then the one, it's actually a 2 megawatt battery system. These systems are at 10 sites. We have 20 inverters at those 10 sites, 4.8 megawatts of capacity with the solar and the fuel cell. Of those 10 sites that we have, 7 are net metered sites and 3 are non-net metered sites. And as I said, we have a lot of experience with net metering, the good and the not so good. So I can share with you some of the challenges that we have had with the net metered sites and the non-net metered sites also. Why do we have 3 non-net metered sites? One of the reasons is that we generate just a small amount of the electricity that is used at those sites, and therefore we don't ever export out to the grid. But all of the other 7 sites that we have, it is very important as far as our financial calculations that net metering is part of that, of those systems, and otherwise we would probably not have any systems in Alameda County.
Question for you. Where installing these, did you use an ESCO? Were these done, did Alameda County put up the capital? How did you set these up?
The photovoltaic systems that we have put, we've done a number of ways. Our first 2 installations that we did were done in a negotiation with a solar manufacturer in Alameda County. The next installation was put out to bid for any of the solar installers that wanted to bid on it. Same with the fuel cell, was put out to bid.
But when you say put out to bid, were they going to cover the financing for you in terms of those bids, or did Alameda County do the upfront capital costs?
No, we brought the project to our board for approval with the financing already in the package. And so the financing that we utilize is one, back when we did the early 2000 systems, we had a self-generation incentive program there that paid for half of the system. So our contract with the installers was for the other half that it wasn't paid for by the incentive, and the incentive went directly to them. It lowered our exposure as far as how much we had to have up front to cover the construction costs. We also, a major portion of all those installations were financed from the California Energy Commission with their energy efficiency finance program at low interest loans.
Okay. All right. Perspective by any of you of whether you feel that you've all indicated cost savings. Some of those cost savings are clearly just from that you're generating the actual electricity that you're using. I would imagine some of your cost savings, though I don't know what percent you're being, what percent of excess generation, and maybe you don't know yet, but it would be interesting to hear that, because of course, if those with the perspective that's a subsidy, the subsidy would mostly come into play in terms of that excess, but if you could speak to that.
As far as net metering, I don't necessarily look at it as a subsidy. I look at it as because we are basically a small generator of electricity, and that electricity is going back onto the grid for PG&E to sell to other customers. As far as where the electrons go, for instance, our Castro Valley Library, right now I can say we are exporting out to the neighboring community. The electrons go to the first building next to us that needs electricity, and PG&E is selling that electricity to them. We are getting credited for that amount of electricity, definitely, but for the Castro Valley Library, we generate about we generate 100% of the needs of the library, and that was one of our goals, was to get a net zero installation. Some of the others are as low as 5% of the total electricity used, and anywhere in between. So most wise, as far as installations for commercial buildings, you usually aren't going to have enough space for 100%. So you're always tied into the utility. You're always buying electricity from the utility, and you're buying more electricity than you're actually generating or getting credited for.
There's a general rule of thumb for schools, which is that you want to try to maximize the offset of your PG&E bill or your Southern California Edison bill or whatever by building the smallest possible system, by using both the, because the smaller system, smaller the capital cost, less the annual amortization that you have to pay. That's now what your payment is versus what you paid for your electricity. For schools in the Central Valley, where we do a lot of work, low-income school districts in that area, where they have a lot of late spring, early fall, high expensive use because of needing to keep their classrooms within a reasonable temperature. The rule of thumb is that they can probably offset 100% of their electricity bill. We actually size it to about 98%, with about anywhere between 85 and 88% electricity uses. So the net metering piece is about 10%. Now, I agree. I mean, I think Matt explained it better than almost anybody today. It's not like that's a subsidy. PG&E is selling that excess power that's coming out during the summer to other people. And so, the district is just taking advantage of the fact that they're shut down in the summer for the most part, and so have that gap between what they're producing and what they're using, and those credits that they get during that time allow them to have a smaller production during the other parts of the year to get to that 98% offset of their electricity bill.
It's an economic incentive because they don't want to buy too big of a system because they're going to be paying for it over the life, even though they're there for a long time. Hopefully,
and under the AB 920 rules, if they do produce more than their historical usage, they're only going to get back from the utility a very, very small amount. That's going to be less per kilowatt hour than it costs them to make that excess beyond that 100% that point from that historical usage.
So put yourself in my position. There are obviously lots of schools other than Lodi and Firebaugh that do not have solar energy. They're a little nervous about what's going to happen here in California. A lot of people are nervous about what's going to happen. What message should I be sending out? What's the message that would encourage schools to get into this business?
It's not a one-size-fits-all, and it doesn't work for everyone. The reality is that depending on the particular load profile, the usage profile of a particular school district, solar may or may not be economically beneficial today. But over the long term, as Lyndon was talking about, as costs come down, and particularly if we're able to maintain low rates, capital costs for borrowing for districts, or have programs like the QSCAB, it will work for other districts. But then we do need to have, particularly for those urban districts, opportunities for them to be able to build at sites in ways that are low cost, using the virtual net metering that Art was talking about. So you need to have the message I would say is get a good objective analysis from an independent provider of what is your usage profile and how does that fit against what the costs in the marketplace are and what the opportunities are in the marketplace in terms of capital costs and installation costs.
And if I could just add on to that briefly, the real problem with solar installation for school districts is the overall cost. Alameda County talked about their participation, in QSCB, Firebaugh talked about QSCB participation. With Lodi Unified, we would not have been able to make this project work, save for our participation in the Qualified Energy Conservation Bond Program that was produced as part of the federal ARA legislation. We were one of only 3 educational organizations nationwide that were successfully able to negotiate that. But without that and that low interest loan support, this project wouldn't have flown. Without net metering, this project wouldn't have flown. The reality for school districts is, from a financing perspective, solar projects walk a very fine line in terms of being able to produce income for us. And we are looking to produce income. We need to produce income in any way, shape, or form that we can put it on the table. This is a very viable option for us if we can find a way to put the solar on the ground in a cost-effective fashion. Net metering, again, is a very vital component in that.
Mr. Bradford, did you have a question? So another question I had, it's not really come up that much, but given, even with the benefit of net metering, given the price of the solar and such, my understanding is most programs, or most, whether it's an installer or the ESCO, I don't know, you can tell me, Terra Verde, if you do this, but usually there's an effort to first bring down the load of the facility. There's an energy efficiency component so that the system is sized even lower. Could you just speak to that? Is that a feature of all of yours?
Certainly. From the Lodi Unified perspective, we engaged in an energy conservation project more than a year and a half before the solar project actually went on the ground. That resulted in a net savings of approximately $1.5 million per year in overall energy usage, the majority of that coming through our electrical utility budget. Once that was accomplished, we knew we had an opportunity then to come and one more time, looking at every variable that's affected in the solar realm, knew that we could come in and say, okay, we now have that piece of the puzzle solved. Can we find low interest rate financing to support the project? When we found that resolution, then we knew that we had a viable project in connection with our ability to access net metering and rebates through PG&E and other issues that might be out there, that were out there for us to access, again, to make this financially viable.
And under the California Solar Initiative, you do, in fact, have to do, I think, an insufficient, but you do have to do an energy audit. If you were to change anything, I would beef up that requirement so that when you put your rebate application, it's based on a very gross sense of what those energy efficiency opportunities might be. But we even if the district doesn't have the money to invest in some of those energy efficiency upgrades, we size the project assuming that at some point in the next 5 or 10 years, something will come along that will allow them to do that, because load reduction, either through energy efficiency upgrades, through controls, through demand management, through load shifting, that has got to be the first piece. Then you figure out, okay, let's size the solar appropriately to reduce the cost of the remainder that you can't get rid of.
And in Alameda County, all of our projects we've done energy efficiency first. That's the first thing we do. That's the cheapest way to reduce utility bills, is through energy efficiency. I'd like to actually bring up one other thing that I didn't touch on, and that's for especially solar projects. You're looking at a 20-year expected life, and actually 25 or 30 years. So it's a long-term commitment. The financial aspects of it for us, as we have a debt service that we have to pay off for a certain time, up to 15 years. Part of our calculation are these net metering credits that we'll get, and also standby charges. I understand that standby charges have been exempted and to move forward, but if standby charges were brought back in, or departing load charges, it would very much hurt our financial part.
Well, I want to thank the panel. We need to leave some time for public comment, and we do have another committee coming in at 4, but it's possible that the energy efficiency component may be why there's only less than 0.5% of total electricity generated is under the net metered or DG program right now. So just because, of course, you pull your load down first. But I found maybe the public who want to make public comment could come up to that mic right there on the edge of the, and if we could be brief. Is there any? Just hurry, let's start the public comment, and we got to be brief because we got to be out of here at 4. You don't need to sit, you can use that mic right there. Just pull it down.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Kidman, Clean Energy Advocate with Environment California Research and Policy Center, a statewide environmental advocacy organization. The state of California's rooftop solar policies are working. In fact, solar power is booming throughout the state. Over the past 2 years, California's rooftop solar market has doubled in size, and the state now has more solar power than all but 5 nations in the world. California is building a strong and healthy solar industry, creating much-needed green jobs, reducing air pollution, and helping to drive down the price of solar energy. In addition, California's solar market is growing increasingly diverse, taking hold in cities and urban areas, along the coast and in the Central Valley, and in Republican and Democratic strongholds alike. In fact, a recent report by Environment California Research and Policy Center shows that Fresno, Bakersfield, and Sacramento rank among the state's top solar cities, competing with the likes of Los Angeles and San Diego. Solar power is booming here because, simply put, the state legislature in 2006 decided to get behind big, bold solar policies. Without those policies, in particular net metering, average consumers would not be able to afford to go solar. California would likely be without many of the 3,500 solar companies and the 25,000 solar jobs in the industry today. We'd be without the cleaner air, the diversified energy mix, and the 30 to 40% drop in the cost of going solar. As the sponsor of SB 1, which lifted the cap on net metering, Environment California is proud to celebrate with you the fact that California's solar policies are working. To inject a mid-game change in rules would send mixed signals to the marketplace, severely jeopardizing the commitment first made by the legislature in 2006. Looking ahead, California has tremendous potential to build upon this foundation to achieve the governor's goal and to increase our local clean energy by 2020. This goal is gaining support across the state from over 80 elected officials, over 600 businesses, and thousands of citizens across the state.
I'm going to need
to get there, it is imperative that California continue net metering. Thank you.
Great. You want to go, and then just so we don't have any delay, and then you'll be next. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Assembly members, for hosting today's hearing. My name is Hillary Pearson, and I'm here representing Sungevity. We're a residential solar company based in Oakland, California. I thank you for the opportunity to present comments on behalf of Sungevity regarding the importance of net metering to our business, our customers, and our employees. Sungevity serves customers in 8 states out of our Oakland headquarters. We launched our business in California in 2007, and it remains our largest market, thanks in large part to the stability of solar policies, the most important being net metering, and the enthusiasm for solar among California residents. Net metering equals solar installations. Solar installations bring new solar-related businesses to cities throughout California, higher tax revenue, including sales tax on the equipment, increased property tax when homes with solar systems are sold, income tax from installation labor, and increased spending from homeowners who have reduced their energy expenses by going solar. In our work in California, we partner with dozens of subcontractors throughout the state to complete our residential installation. This partnership with local installers demonstrates that solar helps to create non-exportable local jobs and revenue throughout California. By putting panels on rooftops in communities statewide, net metering is spurring new demand for hard-hit employment sectors like construction and electricians, and creating entirely new job opportunities like specialized solar designers and technicians. In closing, it's critical to note that net metering is the single most important policy catalyst for the solar-related environmental and economic benefits that our state is experiencing. Without it, or with dramatic and unduly changes, these benefits spurred by net metering are threatened to disappear. On behalf of Sungevity's hundreds of employees, we ask that lawmakers engage on the many benefits that net metering brings to our state and work to protect and enhance this critical policy.
Thanks.
Thank
you. Hi, I'm Don Osborne, CEO of Spectrum Energy Development of Elk Grove, California. I'm the former superintendent of renewable resources for SMUD, who brings you your lights today. As a former utility manager, I can tell you that PV generation provides many direct benefits to the utility and the ratepayers at large, as well as to the electric grid itself. This is because of the rather good match between the PV generation and the utility peak loads, so that this net metering question is one where we are providing power when it is most needed, typically, and offsetting the need to buy what is typically the most expensive power to buy on the grid, peaker power. At penetrations of up to 20% of total utility generation capacity, and of course we're only at nearly 5%, solar users are not getting a free ride at all. Net metering is central to the continued development of solar in our state. Many studies, which I can provide you information on from Austin, Nevada, and SMUD, demonstrate an average net value to the utility anywhere from 7.5 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. Also, I'll just cut out the rest of this and just simply remind you of what Dave Freeman, the former head of SMUD and former head of LAWP, would often say to us. Utility economists would rather be precisely wrong than approximately right. That they would assign zero or near zero values to benefits that they did not have precise values on, rather than use the best approximate values available. Net metering has the advantage of being both simple and being approximately right to the true grid value of distributed PV to the grid. Complicating a simple, approximately right mechanism with a much more complicated mechanism that varies from site to site would throw this marketplace into a bit of chaos. So I'll simply conclude by saying net metering is not only central to keeping California moving forward and commercializing solar, but it's the right thing to do for the solar system owner, for the solar businesses in California, for all the ratepayers, even the utilities, and it's the right thing to do for our state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm Jim Conran of the Executive Committee of the California Small Business Association and chair of our Utilities Issues Subcommittee. Our association represents over 200,000 small business owners and reflect every sector of the small business community. The reason I'm here today is to express our concern that we oppose any programs that will add additional pressure for rate increases for electric small business customers. The number of small businesses owners in California with employees has gone from 1.1 million to 718,000 in the last 5 years. That's a loss of 400,000 small businesses. This means a loss of local and tax revenues, and it brings about countless unemployed. A primary contributor to this problem has been the cost of electric service. These costs are the current obligations of PUC rates, future costs for expanding the transmission hookups for energy providers, more demands for increased distribution systems, and the increased demands for social benefit programs. We believe the legislature needs to look at the impact of all of these programs and the reality that there is no shortage of new solar or other renewable projects available to meet the 33% RPS and beyond. Also, to answer your question before, Assemblyman, about 80% of the small commercial customers do not own their facilities. They lease them. So they're not in a position to reap the benefits of having these types of programs because that's up to the landlord of the building. We thank you for your time and your support, and we, again, encourage you to continue to look at these issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mignon Marks, Executive Director of the California Solar Energy Industries Association. We're celebrating our 35th year this year here in Sacramento. CalSIA supports continuing the state's net energy metering program, because it's a strong financial incentive to go solar. Ooh. And it's also creating jobs for CalSIA member companies. We also look forward to participating in an unbiased analysis of the costs and benefits of net metering to net metered customers, ratepayers that don't have net metering, as well as to the electric utility itself. We also look forward to the implementation of the feed-in tariff, which CalSIA members also are looking forward to participating in. This is for particularly for systems under 1 megawatt. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Assembly members. My name is Mardina Graham. I'm a low-income homeowner from San Francisco, and I'm Vice President of Grid Alternatives Board of Directors. As you already know, Grid Alternatives is a nonprofit solar installer serving low-income families and communities throughout California. It is a pleasure to be here this afternoon to discuss the importance of net metering, especially how it is positively impacting the lives of thousands of lower-income families throughout California, including my own family. Though most people may not think of me or my neighbors as a typical solar customer, I have seen more and more solar systems being installed over the past several years. I actually consider myself an early adopter of solar, having decided to go solar back in 2006. My primary reason for making this decision was simply financial. Net metering allows me to save over 75% off my monthly electric bill. Living on a fixed income, I've been retired for 10 years now. These savings are critical for me and for families in similar financial situations. The family that Grid Alternatives serves continue to make the smart decision to go solar based on bill savings provided through net metering. I ask this committee to think of me as a typical solar customer and to urge you to protect and expand net metering to ensure bill savings continue to be available for future solar customers. Thousands of hardworking, lower-income families like mine have already made the decision to go solar, and thousands more will continue to make this a life-changing decision. I would like to say thank you, and I think it's safe for me to say at 4 o'clock. If you have any questions, I'll take them.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Graham Freeman. I'm a principal with an IT consulting company called Upraxis. We provide computer networking, advanced telecom, and web application development. 70% of our revenue is in renewable energies. Those are our clients. Our office is in a state enterprise zone, so our neighbors are generally struggling to some degree. We have 4 full-time staff. 2 of us came from underemployed situations before they joined our company. Now they're living a comfortable lifestyle and doing excellent work. We have 10 contractors that allow us to scale up and scale down as needed. Generally speaking, our clients need, well, we as a state need photovoltaics, and our clients need net metering in order to continue photovoltaics. Thanks for your time. I appreciate the positive energy centered around this issue.
Good afternoon, Valerie Torella, Pacific Gas and Electric Company. PG&E continues to be a leader in solar with 30% of the rooftop systems nationwide in our service area. We support customers' solar generation and supported the 5% cap legislation. But we do feel that the net metering program in California has proven what it should do, proven to be successful in establishing a market. And we do feel it's time to implement a program going forward that does not rely on subsidies from the non-participating customers. We are supportive of a robust study of the costs and the benefits of net energy metering that's contained in Mr. Bradford's bill, AB 2514. And finally, just want to thank you for launching this discussion. This is a very important public policy issue, and we look forward to some future discussions where there will be an opportunity for additional discussion on the costs and the benefits of net metering, where all stakeholders, including utilities and others, including the PUC, can present their perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly Boyd on behalf of Southern California Edison, which is not a gas company.
Correct.
Thank you. First, I'd like to support the comments made by PG&E, and I'd like to add that California's moving forward aggressively with renewable development to meet RPS and other policies. Policymakers should focus on the best way to provide electricity to customers with the benefits of renewable energy at the lowest cost. Policymakers should also focus on customer equity within those cost structures. The net metering program has resulted in significant increases of solar installations in California, but has also come at great expense to the non-participating customers. There are a number of other programs that will deliver many more megawatts of solar and other renewables to customers more cost effectively. We look forward to optimizing those other programs as well to achieve California's clean energy goals, to continuing to work with stakeholders to move this process forward, and to study. Mr. Bradford.
Go ahead.
J.C. Thomas on behalf of San Diego Gas and Electric. We're at a record pace in terms of connecting and interconnecting rooftop solar systems in our service territory. We have over 16,000 customers. And in fact, we're adding 10 new ones per day. We want to continue this and make sure that it's a choice for our customers in the future. And with the increase we've experienced in our service territory, now is the time to be looking at how to make net metering sustainable, something that many of the panelists talked about today. San Diego is one of the cities leading the charge in adopting solar, and with the success comes challenges. If these challenges are not addressed, it could negatively impact the future of solar. That is why it's important to start the discussion today so that we have a smooth transition in the future. SDG&E is committed to working collaboratively with stakeholders, and we've initiated a process in January with over 50 stakeholders, including the solar industry, that will look at these issues. It includes energy experts, our customers, and we want to have an open and transparent discussion on these important issues and help expand our options on increasing the use of solar so that we can transform in the future. An important first step is conducting a study around the cost and benefits of solar, something that AB 2514 would do, that net energy metering provides our utilities and our customers. This is something we are committed to doing, with many stakeholders agree that this is an important first step in making solar energy sustainable in the future. Thank you for your time.
Madam Chair, members, Donna Brownsey for SEIA, which is the Solar Energy Industry Association. First, I want to thank all of the members and all of the participants, speakers, as well as the commenters during public testimony. I think if the one thing that we heard today is that the start of this discussion is very important, and that considering all of the facts that surround the California's energy portfolio is absolutely critical. And from the solar industry, we believe that we have a very important part of that story to tell with respect to the facts around solar, and we know that as we go forward in these discussions, we can count on the attention of the folks in this room, at the dais, and in the audience. And we just want to thank you very, very much for taking the time and to address this issue. Thank you.
My name is Aaron Jobson with Quattrochi-Quoc Architects, and I'm a board member of the School Energy Coalition. And I just wanted to follow up on some things that were said earlier and how important net metering is to schools. We're an architect. We design green schools, but we worked with a number of school districts over the past 3 or 4 years to implement solar programs. I have a list here of 10 school districts that we worked with, which constitutes about 10 megawatts of solar power that's been installed. And we'll save those school districts almost $140 million over the next 25 years in operating expenses. Which provides a huge educational benefit, none of which would be possible without net metering. We're working with numerous school districts moving forward. None of those projects will be possible without net metering and without the certainty that net metering will exist into the future. And obviously, if net metering changes, that changes the economics upon which all of those projects were built. So thank you again for considering these issues and continuing to do so and studying them further.
Thank you. So I think we're going to wrap up our hearing. I just want to make a quick and Mr. Murkowski or Mr. Bradford, you might want to add just a quick closing comment. I wanted to just express that when the construction of this panel, of this hearing, yes, the IOUs were not present at the dais, and that isn't because they don't have a very important role in this. They clearly do, but at least from the perspective of the members, we do hear from them quite frequently. We know we have great access to them, and so we are able to access their perspective. It's the some of the perspectives that were shared with us today from the schools, from the local government, from the study by Mr. Weissman. Those are harder for us to access. So that's really why we constructed it this way, not in any way to indicate that the IOUs don't have an important perspective to share. It's more that we do have great access to that one. I hope that as we go forward, that clearly this debate's got to be around more than just our cap, more than just around CSI. It's also got to be in the context of what is the role of distributed generation within our entire program in California. And but I think the important point I would like to just point out that didn't come out clear enough is that currently total IOU electricity sales in our state in a dollar amount are $26.6 billion. $26.6 billion. The last PUC study, and it's out of date, showed that only 20 million of that was under net metering. So this is, we're talking a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. And even under full CSI, it's still only about 137 million. Again, such a fraction. So while I am open to hearing the data to see what kind of rate pressures it creates, for anyone to say that it has huge rate pressure is very difficult to comprehend given the fraction of the total electricity sales. Now, certainly, if we were to achieve the kind of distributed generation goals the governor has in mind, or we were to change net metering greatly, yeah, it could. And that's what we have to really understand and grapple with, because I personally believe we do not want to act in a way that negatively impacts the rates for our businesses community or for facilities, whether they're residential, non-residential, whatever, that aren't going to be able to benefit from distributed generation. So we really do have to be very smart in our pursuit of it. But I think in our program to date, it is still such a fraction that I think it's more as we move forward, an understanding.
Well, I believe we need to continue to keep this ground fertile for the advancement of clean energy and also meeting our renewable energy goals that we have set. There's certainly, I thank all the participants who came in and the testimony we hear today. This is a dialogue that's going to continue throughout this session and beyond, so that we can get clear information and make decisions that don't adversely affect our schools or adversely affect our local government, and help us meet these goals. So I thank everybody.
I would just conclude and thank both the co-chairs, Mr. Wojtkowski and Ms. Skinner, for their leadership on this issue and convening this panel, and the participants today. I mean, I think it was a hearty, robust discussion on what we feel or think net metering is, what it isn't, and the potential of what it can be. And that's going to be my focus as we move forward with AB 2514, to really get an honest assessment of where we are with these type of programs as it relates. And even though Ms. Skinner says it's just a small fraction, but when you start factoring in care, and when you start factoring in on the telephone service Lifeline, and you continue to look at your bills, and customers continue to come to me and look at all these subsidies, it all adds up. And when you talk about folks who are struggling to stay in their homes, struggling to pay their house notes, usually the first thing they stop paying is their utility bills. So this blended cost or shared cost does go somewhere. And whether there's great benefit from net metering, that's not the discussion here today. The question is, how do we pay for it? How do we make it equitable? And I think that's what the study bill is going to look at, not whether we change it in any kind of way, but does it make sense in its current form? So I thank you for this opportunity. I thank all of you who participated here today.
We're adjourned.
To ask them to stand, and we'd be happy to recognize you with a round of applause for your outstanding academic success. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for being here. With that, we will go ahead and begin with the first issue that we are going to address, that we have actually added to our agenda for today. And I'd ask Dan Troy and Steve Boylard and Juliana Morazumi to come forward. This is a community college issue around a unfortunate deficit that has manifested itself in their budget, and we wanted to give the opportunity, because of the time factor, to briefly hear this issue. We will not be spending too long on it, but we felt because of the urgency of it, we needed to at least address it. So Dan, are you going to lead us off?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members. I'm Dan Troy. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Fiscal Policy at the Chancellor's Office of the California Community Colleges. And I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for your special attention to this issue and giving me an opportunity to brief the subcommittee on it.
And I'm going to pause briefly and we'll begin with a roll call of members now.
Assemblymember Bonilla.
Here.
Assemblymember Berryhill. Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Nestande. Here. Assemblymember Swanson.
Thank you. Please continue.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Recently, I had the unfortunate task of communicating to our 72 districts that we had a very significant fiscal problem. As we went through what we call the P1 apportionment process, it became apparent to us that in addition to all the very significant direct budget reductions we've taken this year, including the trigger cuts, that we had a funding shortage, an unanticipated funding shortage of about $149 million that is essentially a result of two key factors, insufficient property tax revenues as relative to what was estimated in the budget, and also much lower than anticipated fee revenue collections, including a couple of other very minor adjustments that totaled $149 million. That represents an effective reduction to districts of about 2.75%, which comes very late in the fiscal year for districts to take actions to realize any savings. Their spring sessions have already started. Their staffing is essentially locked in for the year. Districts would have to rely on reserves, borrow funds, and keep positions vacant, which results in a loss of services to students, perhaps reduce the summer sessions. So it's a very significant issue to deal with at a very late period in the fiscal year, particularly on top of the other cuts that we've taken.
Well, and specifically the trigger cut.
That's right. We took a trigger cut of a total, there was Tier 1 and Tier 2 cuts were totaled about $102 million, and that's on top of a net of about $300 million we took as part of the original budget agreement back in June. I do have a handout. I'll walk through it briefly.
Thank you.
That I provided for you. Just for on this first page, just for your information, our base apportionment has got three legs to the system. We take enrollment fees from the students, property taxes, and the general fund provided in the budget fills in the remainder. So to the extent that we're short on enrollment fees or property taxes, we have a hole in our budget. We're showing that fee collections for this year seem to be coming in about $107 million less than what was anticipated. We think this is for a couple of reasons. More and more students simply are eligible for the Board of Governors fee waivers. We have a lot of people who are losing their jobs or unemployed, and they're coming back to the community colleges in order to retool those skills for the new economy. So we've seen a fairly rapid increase in eligibility for those BOG fee waivers. We think that's a key reason for the shortfall that we're facing at this point. The other big part of that is that we're showing property taxes about $41 million lower than what was anticipated in the budget that was enacted back in June. Add in a couple of miscellaneous factors, and again, we're up to about $149 million in a deficit. Now, K-12 does have an automatic backfill. If they have property tax shortfalls, the general fund automatically fills in the remainder. Community colleges do not have that protection. So our colleges, with absent any action by the legislature to appropriate additional funds, our colleges are stuck with an unanticipated cut that they need to deal with. On the next page, we go over some of the cuts that we've taken this past year. We had that, it was a $400 million general fund cut that was somewhat mitigated by the increase in fee revenues. We had the mid-year trigger cuts, which also includes a fee increase that kicks in the summer of this year. Our system, in addition, is dealing with juggling $961 million in annual deferrals, which is about 18% of our total apportionments. That's already a significant fiscal challenge our chief business officials have to juggle. So our $149 million shortfall is in addition to all that. On the next page, we show some of the actions that colleges have been forced in recent years to take to deal with the very significant reductions we received both this year and in other recent years. Key to that, of course, is reducing course offerings. We're down more than 300,000 students in headcount over the past few years. That's, for comparison, the entire CSU system is a little over 400,000. So that's a lot of students to shed at a time when workforce training is very important to our state's economic recovery. We've increased class sizes significantly. Colleges are forced to lay off adjuncts and part-time and classified staff. They're borrowing to manage cash. They're digging very deeply into the reserves. We're seeing those pool of reserves dwindle each year. And now those reserves have become quite minimal for many of our districts. So we're very concerned what this may mean for some of our more fiscally troubled districts. Finally, we propose a few solutions to this. We would consider this to be simply truing up the current year funding if you backfilled the deficit. After all, the colleges are simply providing the services that were assumed in the budget. I think it's fair that we get funded for the services that we were expected to provide. Also, I mentioned earlier that we don't have the automatic backfill of property tax or fee revenue shortfalls that K-12 does. If we could get statutory protection to do that, that would help protect our districts and give them assurances in future years that they will be paid for the services that they are expected to provide within the budget. And the final issue I'd note is that as part of the governor's January proposal, he is proposing to reduce our current year budget by about $147 million to reflect what they would believe will be increased property taxes due to the dissolution of RDAs. So we're asking you to please hold off on action for that for the meantime until we can sort out this shortage issue. To take action on that right now, we think would be premature given the other hits our colleges have taken.
Okay.
With that,
thank
you.
Who would like to speak next? Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve Boiler with The Analyst. Not a lot to add. I think it's fair the way that Mr. Troy is portraying this, that this is an unanticipated reduction in revenue available to the community colleges. At the same time, I think it's important to look at it in the broader context that the state itself has been experiencing a significant shortfall in anticipated revenues. And one of the ways we've coped with that is through reductions in budget including trigger cuts. So, I'd say part of the same forces that are driving shortfalls in community college property taxes and perhaps in fee collections are also affecting the overall state treasury. So it doesn't make for a very easy answer on how to come up with additional funding. Secondly, I'd point out that we typically every year we get a report from community colleges like this with a mid-year kind of estimate of where numbers are going. Last year, I believe the number was something like a $50 million shortfall. And these numbers are point in time. They're pretty difficult to project, and we did find in the current year, for example, that in the prior year that whole essentially corrected itself, particularly in this area of property taxes. I think on the fee revenue, there's another force at play here that's important to think about. And if you look at the fee collections that have been anticipated versus what was collected, as Mr. Troy points out, a very high number of students are receiving waivers now, waivers for their fees. I think the projection is 63% of FTS would not be paying their fees. And so what this suggests, maybe to add to a list of possible solutions would be to try and get under control a little bit better the BOG waiver program. And I know our office, we can talk about this more when we have the community college meeting, has offered some suggestions to you on how you could better manage BOG costs by imposing more requirements on students in order to be able to receive those funds. Because again, at this point, close to 2/3 of students are not even paying fees, and so I think it's worth looking at that as well.
Just though for clarification, these were projections, and the community college already budgeted based on them, and now we're talking about a correction. So it isn't talking about a reduction moving forward. There was an assumption that there would be
this money would be there, and now it's not there, which is a different issue for the community colleges in terms of their budgeting and how they're going to adjust for it.
Well, though there are 2 points I was trying to make, Madam Chair. One is when I was talking about maybe looking at the policies of the bog waiver, you're right. I think that's something that's not going to help them in the current year. It might help them in the future, similar to the way that community college is suggesting that maybe you want to provide statutory protection, which I think would be also something that's talking about the future. But for the current year, what I'm suggesting is that property taxes may end up coming in higher than community colleges are currently projecting, and that would mean that at the end of the day, the community colleges might not receive the kind of $149 million shortfall that they're currently projecting. So it's just a point in time in the current year.
If I could comment on a couple of points Mr. Boilard made. I do take the state's fiscal situation seriously. I understand there's a variety of bad options that range from bad to worse you have to consider in looking at your budget situation. I would suggest, though, that to have us bear this burden simply because we have this hole in our budget, we have this statutory leak, if you will, that allows us to take this cut in an unintended way. It'd be one thing if the legislature were to come in the middle of the year and say, hey, we need to make some reductions. Let's do this in a thoughtful manner and determine how to meet them out. But for us simply to take that hit because the statute doesn't provide that backfill, I don't think that's the deliberative way to make these mid-year adjustments.
Right.
And I would acknowledge that Mr. Boylad's point is correct about the property taxes in particular. Sometimes those estimates do change when we get to the end of the year. We did have a shortfall. We ended the prior year with a bit of a shortfall as well, but the property tax issue was not as bad at the end of the day as it was.
And what's the breakdown between the property tax with this $149 million and the other again?
Yeah, over about $107 million of the $149 is actually due to fee revenues.
So the smaller portion by far is the property tax. So even if there is an adjustment up, we're still going to have a pretty severe problem in your budgets.
That's right. At the end of the year, that number may be a little bit different, but I think it's fair to assume it's going to be a very significant number.
Okay, yes, thank you. Juliana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Juliana Morizumi with Finance. While I would largely concur with the LAO, I did want to add a few other points to this. With the current year trigger cut, the cut was actually $70 million in apportionments, or $72 million in apportionments, excuse me, and $30 million was we anticipated having as additional student fee revenue with increasing the enrollment fee. And the CCCs voluntarily said, no, it's too difficult, and we want to forego that $30 million. So we want to put off increasing the fees. Just to give you a little bit of history, in past years, it's the property tax and the student fee revenue fluctuations are not uncommon. It is point in time. In prior year, in 2010, we did work with the Chancellor's Office in looking at a possible $50 million deficit between property tax and student fees. And while the student fees weren't fully realized, the property tax more than made up for not just the property tax shortfall that was anticipated earlier in the year, but also backfilled the deficit that that didn't get realized in the student fees. For several years, the waiver rate ranged between 40 and 45% of the FTS. And in current year, we had anticipated about a 51 to 52%, as opposed to what is showing up now as a 63%.
Okay.
Which is why for budget year, we've allowed for a 70% waiver rate at a cost of over $855 million. In 2009, just to give you some context, there were $369 million in fees waived. Current year, we're anticipating, if the projections hold on the course that they're showing currently, it would be a $621 million in enrollment fees being waived.
Okay.
So it's hard to judge on that one, and we knew that it would be challenging, especially given that we did have just this fall with the rate increase.
Right.
So, and we had talked about, how that would be how it would be eroded.
Do you think there's any possibility of helping the community colleges with this shortfall? What's your opinion?
At this point in time, the numbers are just they're just too unreliable at this point.
Okay.
I would recommend that we wait until May, and we'll have a better sense of where the property taxes really are.
Okay. And do you want to give a concluding comment, Mr. Troy?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that it's not unusual if you look back over the last 7 years, and I've looked back at about 10 years of data to see where we were at this point in all the years in regards to a deficit. It's not terribly unusual to have a deficit of $30, $40 million, inside of a half a percentage point, something like that. And I think it's one thing in that kind of situation to say, hey, let's see where we get to, where we are at the end of the year. When we're at a deficit, though, that's approaching nearly 3%, if you're a district, you can't wait. You have to make changes now, or your budget will be out of balance. So I think the reason why I'm trying to give particular attention to the issue at this time is because of the magnitude of the problem. Districts have little choice but to do something about that budget right now.
So are you saying you have districts that are making cuts now, or are they all waiting till May?
Well, I think to the extent that they can make some reductions, they're going to try to do that now. The problem is that for most districts are already well into their spring term. They can't reduce course sections at this point. Their staffing is more or less locked in. To the extent they have some vacant positions, they probably won't fill them. Okay. If they can still reduce some of their summer sessions, to the extent districts are still providing summer sessions, I think we'll see some reduction there, and that's obviously bad for students.
Thank you. We have some public comment. Can we hear that now?
Teresa Tennant with the Community College League of California, representing our 72 community college CEOs and trustees throughout the state. Want to reiterate and underscore the comments that were shared today by Vice Chancellor Dan Troy. And I guess, we can all acknowledge the numbers are volatile, the estimates are bad. The problem is then the community colleges get left holding the bag on this. And, it's obviously a perennial issue. Since 2007-8, we have been the victim of about $255 million cumulative of bad local revenue projections. At the very same time, we're serving over 252,000 unfunded full-time equivalent students. So, yes, the enrollment fee formula calculation, the wheels have come off in terms of how you actually are able to accurately predict that number. The prior year, the number was $50 million short in the enrollment fee alone. And I think that's the point that we need to underscore and highlight. I've been doing community college budgets for 16 years. We have never seen an enrollment fee shortfall to the magnitude that we're seeing now, $107 million. And of course, as Vice Chancellor Dan Troy mentioned, our districts are responding by making decisions right now to reduce course offerings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Patrick McCallum with the Los Angeles, Peralta, Mount San Jacinto, and other community college districts. What we're asking is that this be dealt with before May Revise. The message needs to go out to the districts. So the formal message that's gone out is that they're going to be cut $149 million. So that's $5 million in Peralta. It's $13 million at the LA Community College District. That's what a CEO has to deal with. So we're asking that there be an urgency legislation like you did with transportation, sending a clear message to the districts that you're going to be held harmless on this. If the numbers change in May Revise, then we can make those adjustments in those numbers within the budget. We've identified some revenue sources. Otherwise, you're looking at budgets that many districts, there's probably about 20 districts right now, that have no reserve, no ability, no layoff notices as well, and are going to have to look at different options within the budgets.
Okay.
Thank you for addressing this issue.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Jonathan Lightman on behalf of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. So what we hear is that given the signal that has gone out to the districts, the trustees are asking of the CEOs are then asking of the faculty, and the students are left holding the bag. We've talked to a number of you individually about this, and yesterday that we had a student who's earning nothing right now. He is 1 or 2 courses away from completing a fairly interesting certificate on motorcycle repair for exotic motorcycles. He could be making $50,000 right now if he could get his courses. And given the signal that this is sending, it's going to delay it even further. And we just have to multiply that by how many students in our college system, and that is tax revenue that's lost to the state. I just also want to align our position with that of the system office in terms of rejecting the property tax adjustment with the RDAs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Judith Michaels with the California Federation of Teachers, and not to repeat others' testimony, but the danger is real. It's real for our students. The cuts will come in the spring semester. We don't think districts, without a signal from the legislature, they would have no choice. So classes will be cut, and we need this backfill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Assemblymember Swanson with a question?
Yes, no, I in the budget discussions, sometimes we lose sight of the mission, and it's very clear that community colleges serve, fulfill a specific mission in our attempt to make sure that California students have access to higher education. I say that as a proud community college graduate, and it's clear that the harm that's done, particularly in this economy, when you have community colleges that are the most accessible. They're more accessible than our state universities and our UC system, and we should do all we can to protect that, because these are students that are there because they want an opportunity to move forward, and if we're looking at trying to turn our economy around, the diversity of courses and skills that are offered in community colleges is almost irreplaceable. And so I think that we just have to be very smart about how we look at this situation. I mean, it affects, in the long run, it affects our economy. It certainly slows down the careers of the young men and women that are participating in the system. So I hope we will do all we can to send an affirmative signal that we want to make sure we support a most flexible form of higher education and a most accessible form. So anyway, I'm just concerned about
Right.
that, Madam Chair, as we
Yes.
move forward. But thank you so much for your testimony. It was very clear, and I think the consequences are dire if we don't take action.
Assemblymember Berryhill.
Yeah. So let me I want to be clear. So what you're looking for is you want a backfill policy consistent kind of with what K-12 has when they come up.
That's right. If you put yourself in the chair of a district CEO, and you get the message from the system office in late February that you've got a nearly 3% unanticipated hit, you can't wait for June. Right. That's too big. You've got to take some actions now to the extent you can. So if we had some statutory protection, I think they would have the assurance that money would come in at the end of the day. Now, I certainly understand we could get it to a mid-year situation where the legislature needs to come in and make cuts, but let's do that in a deliberative fashion if we have to do that.
On the waivers, so the waivers are at 63%, so that means 37% of the students are covering those 63 with their fees, right?
That's right. And just to be clear, the 63% is actually percentage of credits waived, so that may be a little different than percentage of students. But yeah, it's the percentage, no doubt, has increased rapidly in recent years. And I certainly don't fault the Department of Finance for their estimates to be lagging there, given that rapid growth. But it does present a very real problem for us to deal with.
And what can be done? I mean, can you give me any examples of what could be done to bring that waiver percentage down a little bit?
Well, our office has done a couple of things, actually. We, as of the 12-13 year, we've adjusted the right now you're eligible for fee waivers if you have any need whatsoever, as found on the FAFSA. So if you have $1 need, you can get a complete waiver for all of your fees. And with the administrative change we made as of 12-13, you'd need to have at least $1,100 in need, so equivalent to about a full year's worth of cost. And we also have some other proposals in the Student Success Task Force legislation.
We're going to have to wrap this up because we actually squeezed this into the agenda, and we're not going to spend any much longer time on it. We're going to go ahead and direct staff. We'll hear it again. The main idea here was at least to raise the flag on it so we could get working on it and direct staff to meet and try to work on a solution, and then we'll have another higher ed hearing, and if we need to move it out of our April timeframe sooner, we'll do that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Boylard, you can remain at the front, and we'll now begin our overview of the Governor's 2012 higher education budget proposal, and then get into the details on the state financial aid programs. Thank you, Mr. Boylard, for being here today.
Sure. Thanks, Madam Chair and members. I'll make this brief. I know you'll be talking about all the various higher education issues throughout your hearing, so this is just an overview to get you just kind of a roadmap or a feel for generally what the governor has proposed in the area of higher education. And the sergeant has passed out a handout that has a few bullet points that summarizes our main characterization of the governor's proposal. As you know, we put out a fuller report and analysis of the governor's budget higher education proposal back in January. You should all have copies of that as well. The governor's budget for higher education really focuses all of its budget solutions in the area of financial aid, primarily Cal Grants. There's about $300 million of proposed reductions in the Cal Grant program. We'll be talking about that later on today. There is no proposed general fund savings for the segments themselves. Beyond that, the governor's proposing really a new compact with higher education. He is not using that term compact, but in different administrations have used different terms. A partnership has been used by previous governors as well. But essentially it's a funding agreement that he's proposing in which the three segments of higher education would receive 4% minimum general fund increases starting in budget year +1. In 2013-14. So that would be a minimum general fund increase for the segments each year, and that would be contingent upon their meeting some performance targets. He doesn't define those yet. It sounds like the compact's still under discussion. But that's kind of a centerpiece in his 8 pages of what he was looking, to kind of take a new approach to higher education. Connected with that, in the proposed budget for 2012-13, the governor is taking a very different approach in 2 big areas of debt service and in retirement funding. Both of these are costs the universities and colleges incur as part of their normal business. However, up to this point, the budget has funded debt service, GO bond debt service for the universities and colleges outside of their main base budgets. You appropriate that money in a different item. The governor's proposing instead to take the money to fund debt service in 12-13 and roll it into the base of each segment. That's about $388 million in general fund support that would be added to base budgets for the universities and Hastings. And then the governor says, I'm not going to adjust that any further going forward. That's just in your base, and it's up to you to pay costs associated with debt in the out years. And I think the argument for that is that it would force the segments to be deliberate about taking on additional debt because it would come out of their base. You do the same thing with lease revenue bonds. That's currently funded. Debt service on lease revenue bonds currently funded within the segmental budgets, but normally you would adjust that each year depending on what the actual costs were. Again, the governor proposes that would no longer be adjusted. He similarly does the same thing with retirement costs. In CSU, that's a PERS system. In UC, they have their UC retirement system, and the governor once again would say that we're making one final adjustment for the budget year, and no longer would there be any adjustments. There's a number of complications in here, and again, we have a further write-up, and I know this will be a subject of a future hearing, but I think it's an important point that the governor's looking to take a very different approach to how you fund the university's budgets, and that's embedded in the budget bill that's before you. He also proposes some additional flexibility for the colleges and universities, and I would say that rolling that stuff into the base in some ways could be seen as flexibility. He also, though, eliminates earmarks for programs within UC and CSU. In the current year budget, there's a number of schedules or provisional language for specific programs or costs, whether that is certain kinds of research programs, certain nursing programs, Drew Medical Center. There's a number of these in the budget. The governor would eliminate all of those associated earmarks and just have one main support item for the universities. And for the colleges, similarly, he would take $40 million in categorical funding, consolidate them into one large appropriation that could be used for a variety of purposes. Not on your sheet, but I think another similar issue of flexibility is the governor eliminates all enrollment targets. Again, up to this point, you normally in the budget have specified a number of students to be served at each of the segments. The governor would eliminate all enrollment targets and say it's up to the universities to decide how many students they choose to enroll. At the community colleges, similarly, he would eliminate the allocation mechanism that currently is in law. Assemblyman Jack Scott, well, I guess it was Senator Jack Scott, had a bill, SB 361, which kind of created a new funding allocation system. The governor would eliminate that funding allocation system and leave it up to community colleges to decide how they allocate funding. It would not have to be based upon number of students any longer. So, and I know we're really not talking about recommendations, but that's probably one point that I'd really just want to emphasize. We think that enrollment is one of the key building blocks of the workload that you fund, and again, this would take the state out of having anything to say about that. Last couple of points. The governor anticipates no new tuition or fee increases at the colleges or universities. Of course, the CSU has already approved a fee increase, a tuition increase of a little over 9% for the fall. So the governor's budget assumes that would not happen. It's a little unclear. As you know, the trustees make their own choice about setting tuition. And finally, despite this budget that, again, has $300 million in cuts in the financial aid programs and no real reductions in the segments, there would be trigger cuts in the event that the governor was not successful in getting voters to approve his tax increases in November. There would be additional new cuts in the middle of the fiscal year of $200 million each for UC and CSU, and about $292 million for the community colleges. So on the last page, I've just reprinted a page out of our analysis, which just gives you something we get asked for a lot. Is kind of the master sheet of what's happening to all the different fund sources throughout higher education. It goes back to 2007-8, and the reason we do that is just to get away from just looking narrowly at what happens year to year and recognize instead that there's been a series of budget adjustments, many reductions that have been made to the colleges and universities, and increases in tuition and fees, which have resulted in some additional revenue. And on all these points, again, we're looking forward to working with the committee throughout the budget season, and I'd be happy to answer questions or allow us to move on to the next panel.
We're a little pressed for time. We have a number of students who are hopefully want to be part of public comment and have a time frame they're working against. But so with that, we will probably hold all of our questions. But Assemblymember Swanson, did you have a comment?
Just a brief one. There can't be any guarantee there will be no tuition increases.
No, as you know, the trustees of CSU and the UC regents are empowered to make their own decisions. I'm just saying that the amounts of money the governors assume the universities receive assumes that there is no tuition increase.
I see.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
And we'll now focus in, thank you for that overview, on the issue of financial aid and the issues of the cuts there. We'd ask Judy Hyman, a higher education an analyst from the Legislative Analyst's Office, to come and give us a brief overview of this topic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Judy Hyman from the Legislative Analyst's Office. And just as you said, I'll give you a brief refresher on the state's financial aid programs before you consider the governor's specific recommendations. On page 1 of the handout that the sergeant distributed, you can see Cal Grants in the context of the broader higher education pie. Cal Grants work together with other sources of grant aid that are shown in that pie, federal and institutional grants, as well as scholarships, student loans, work-study, parent and student contributions, to together help meet students' costs of attendance, which include not only tuition and fees, but also room and board, supplies, books, and other living expenses. Cal Grants are administered by the Student Aid Commission, which is an independent commission made up of 15 members appointed by the governor, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the chair of the Senate Rules Committee. The commission is charged with administering state-authorized financial aid programs, and a summary of those programs is presented on page 2 of the handout. They fall into 4 categories. Cal Grant programs is by far the biggest, accounting for about 98% of the total spending. In addition, there are loan assumption programs, student information and outreach programs, and then a number of specialized grant and scholarship programs. I'll focus in a little more specifically on Cal Grants and loan assumption programs because the governor has proposals in those 2 areas. And I'd like to make a distinction in Cal Grants between the entitlement programs and the competitive programs. With the entitlement programs, if a student meets specified criteria and applies in time, that student is entitled to receive an award, and there's no cap on the number of awards. In contrast, with the competitive programs, there's a certain number of awards authorized each year, and students compete for those programs based on academic and other eligibility criteria. Entitlement programs account for about more than 90% of the total Cal Grants. Moving on to loan assumption programs, the way these programs work is that while students are still in school, they sign an agreement to complete a particular type of degree or credential and to work after graduation in a specified occupation or setting. In exchange, the state agrees to pay off a portion of their federal loan balance each year after this, as the students complete their employment obligations. Teachers can receive a total of $19,000 in loan payments over a period of 4 years. Nurses can receive a total of $25,000 over 4 years through these loan assumption programs. Students must meet various eligibility criteria to qualify for the Student Aid Commission's programs, and page 3 shows you the criteria specifically for the entitlement programs. As you can see, there are academic criteria in the form of grade point averages. There are income caps and time restrictions for each program. The high school entitlement is for recent high school graduates, so you can see that students must apply by the beginning of March of either the year they graduate from high school or the year immediately following that in order to be eligible. The transfer entitlement is for students who are transferring from a California community college to a baccalaureate institution, and students must be below the age of 28 by the end of the year